Hi folks, my name is Mike Dobbs and welcome to another edition of Government Matters here on Focus Springfield. Today we got two guests. We got the incoming freshman class of the Springfield City Council, and I say that with a small degree of sarcasm since one of our councilors, Brian Santaniello, is certainly a veteran of the council. He's back for a second ride on the merry-go-round here. Our other councilor is brand new to the council, and that's José Delgado. Both of them are at-large councilors, which means that they represent the entire city. And today we're just going to talk a little bit about their background and also what they're hoping to do. Since I know that both gentlemen have been given committee assignments, so they know the kinds of directions that they need to go in. So first of all, thanks very much for being here, guys.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Great to be here.
So I think first of all, we ought to just review who you guys are and what your background is. And I'll take age over youth at this point since obviously I'm aged. Brian, I was trying to remember when you left the city council.
2001.
Okay, and you'd been there 20 or 25 years.
I actually was elected for 26 years. I served 24, but I decided to take the election commission job, so I didn't serve out that term. So okay. So this is actually my 14th term on the council, having been elected now. So this would give me 28 years, but actually 26 of service.
Now, what committees have you been put on? I know that you're involved with this fentanyl issue, but what are some of the others?
President Fenton gave me 3 great committees to be on. I'm chairing the Health and Human Service Committee. That's where we had the fentanyl meeting. There's a crisis in the city of Springfield. We went through it with the police department. We went through it with Helen Calton, who's our commissioner. They're actually lacing marijuana now on the streets, the illegal marijuana, with fentanyl, with PCP, with heroin. That is epidemic, and that's just going to be a tragedy on top of a tragedy. The overdosing is going to continue. It may even increase if we don't get a handle on it. I said at the meeting I'd like to see more public service announcements to get into the schools to tell the kids don't do this. It's one thing to say don't do it, but you got to emphasize the dangers. The parents have to know that this could be deadly for their children or for anyone that takes that. So I had the fentanyl meeting. That's Health and Human Service. The next item on the agenda is going to be infant mortality in the city of Springfield. Springfield has a high infant mortality rate along with Worcester, and black women have 4 times the chance of losing a child in infancy than all the other population in Springfield. That has to change. So I made a commitment to get on that issue and make sure that we can address that issue. The next issue we'll be taking up is the water contamination in the city of Springfield. I know that Timmy Allen, Councilor Allen, has been on that, so I told him I will hold the meeting and you chair it. You run that meeting, and then after that meeting's over, we'll probably have a public hearing on that. And then I want to get to the forever chemicals that are in the city of Springfield. They're everywhere throughout the country. I know there's legislation now in the legislature in Massachusetts to ban those. You have thousands of chemicals that are causing uterine cancer, breast cancer in women. We've got to address that. Remember the old Teflon pans that we had? Well, there's thousands of items like that. Even with our clothing, they spray it and it gets into the system. It gets into our water supply, it gets into our food supply, and it gets into the soil. We have to address that. So those are 4 items that I'm going to address right off the bat. And then I have the other 2 committees. I have the Elder Affairs Committee and I have the Public Safety.
Have you met with those committees as yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet, but I will very shortly, because one of the issues in the Elder Affairs is the high suicide rate of women that are over the age of 65. It's epidemic throughout the country. Springfield's no different. So we have to find out. There's reasons why. They lose a spouse, financial difficulty, Alzheimer's. There's 4 real key reasons why they're committing suicide. We have to address that. Loneliness. We have to address that.
Now, Jose, what committees have you been put on as yet?
Yeah, you know, Council President Fenton is keeping me busy as well. So he's put me on to chair the Audit Committee. I'm also chairing the Digital Equity Committee. And then the other three committees I'm on are Finance, Planning and Economic Development, and the Responsible Employer Ordinance.
I just did a story about the citizen working group that did digital equity.
Yep.
I talked to not only Mike Fenton, but also a couple other people, Dr. Frank Robinson and Jean Canosa Albano from the library. What are you hoping to see out of this? Because to me, this is one of the, broadband isn't a luxury, broadband is a utility. It's like having clean water in your house and electricity in your house, and natural gas if possible. I mean, it's essential. So what are you hoping to see out of this as this goes on?
Well, first of all, I want to get, you know, my first meeting with the team, kind of get introduced to, you know, what's the work that they've been doing on over the last, you know, several years or so. But I mean, to your point, it's essential, right? We saw how much this impacted folks, particularly during COVID, right? You talk about loneliness and COVID, but talk about, you know, not having access to get out, you know, through broadband internet, and we saw that, you know, across the country, obviously, but even here in Massachusetts, you know, I had the fortune of working for Governor Baker, and one of the things that they were working on was this last mile thing and making sure that we connect communities who don't have that essential, you know, broadband access, that they still had, you know, dial-up service or whatever. So I think for me is ensuring that, one, we get this work that they've done, put it out, and put it to work to get our citizens connected, because it is essential, not just from you know, it's from an education standpoint, where a lot more folks are working from home as well, and it's, to your point, it's continuing to keep people connected. So,
what I find interesting about that subject is how other communities in our area, some adjoining communities, have now started a municipal broadband system and service. So Westfield has got one, Chicopee is building theirs out sort of neighborhood by neighborhood. And there seems to be a growing movement across the country that in order to provide a competitive nature, because let's face it, most people are getting a broadband from their cable TV provider, that municipal broadband offers an element of competition. Frequently it's less expensive than getting it from existing providers. I was just wondering if that's something that you'd be interested in exploring.
Yeah, I'm open to that and looking into that. I mean, I know, you know, we have Comcast here, we have one, you know, operator, but I definitely would be happy to look into that. I mean, I want to meet with this committee first to see the work that they've done, and I want to take my guidance from them, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that have been put on there, so the residents are the most important voice.
So I should have taken notes when you were telling me about all of the committees, but let's, so Audit Committee.
So Audit Committee, the Digital Equity Committee, Finance, Planning and Economic Development, and the REO Committee. And I always have to think about it too. I have to like go back in my head and make sure there's like a quiz on this and make sure I remember all 5 of them. But I'm looking forward to working on all 5 of them.
Well, you're on economic development, right?
Correct.
So let's talk to both of you about
Yeah.
economic development, because this is, you know, this ongoing issue in Springfield about, we've had, in the last 15 years, we've had wave after wave of major projects. I mean, here we are sitting in the corner of MGM. That's a major project. And when you're thinking about some of the other major things that have come up, Union Station is another one of them. So I'll just ask you first, Jose, and then you can chime in as well, Brian. What are the type of things that you would like to encourage in terms of economic development? And I'll just preface this, that so much of our economic development has been squarely placed downtown. And I get that and I understand that. And that's fine. I live a mile and a quarter from where we are, so I'm practically a downtown resident. But the neighborhoods also would like to see economic development. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. Like, what would you like to see? What would you encourage developers to come to the city council with as a project?
I mean, you stole it right out of my mouth. I mean, I couldn't agree more with your sentiments. You know, yes, we do need a thriving downtown. We want a thriving downtown where folks can work, live, and play. But this is one of the things that I know I campaigned on is making sure that we don't forget about the neighborhoods, because each neighborhood has their own smaller economic center, for lack of a better term. And I'm actually encouraged by some of the organic, organic development that's been happening on its own, right? I look at Gasoline Alley as a perfect example, right? Mm-hmm. You've seen the momentum there, with the food group there that's, been working there monsoon, and they're bringing other folks working together. I mean, that is a spot that, for years, I think most of us drove through, right? But that's happening organically. How do we take that recipe and kind of multiply that across the city, right? And making sure that our folks are able to go to their favorite spot. And I've seen it in coffee shops, a rise in that. But I've also been encouraged by the amount of women-owned businesses that have been popping up. I mean, and so I definitely would love to see that. And I want to work with, with Chair Curran, Councilor Curran, who's the chair of the Eco Dev Committee, so that we can look at many things like that. But I'd love to see it. I mean, Mason Square has its own thriving. I mean, Indian Orchard, the work that the Citizens Council and the Main Street group of folks have been doing out there. So, one of the things I want to do is I want to go explore. I want to, talk to the different neighborhoods and see, okay, what has been going on? What do you think is missing? And how can we as a city council, as a body, be supportive and advocates to make sure that resources are going your way and not just into downtown?
Brian, what do you think about economic development?
Well, I think I was chairman of the Planning and Economic Development Committee 17 years. And it's a great committee to be on, but it's a balancing act. You've got the neighborhoods and you've got the business development. And they have to go hand in hand because they sometimes encroach on each other. So you have to make sure there's a compromise if a compromise is possible. So you have to be leery of that. The very first act I took on the council was Performance Foods. We gave them a TIF agreement, and we created, I think, 350 jobs. And those are like $77,000 a piece. So the very first act I took on the city council was an economic one. And Jose and I both said to Performance Food Services, we would hope that you would hire people, give preference to Springfield residents first, because I think it was 25% of their workforce is Springfield. That really should be changing and should be much higher. We've got the Eastfield Mall. It's rising from the ashes again. It's like a phoenix.
But does anyone know what actually is going to happen there?
There's going to be. I think it could be a blend of commercial with housing, but it's going to happen. We know that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I agree with Jose. We cannot forget Indian Orchard. It's the other Main Street. Yeah. And we've got to make sure that we maintain that, the businesses stay there. We have businesses that have been there almost 100 years, like the Nixon Company. But we need like small shops, minority-owned, women-owned. We've got to encourage that. And we can do that through money that we have with the city. We can make that available, small loans, even the Small Business Association loans, small business loans. So we can make all this stuff happen. And I'm excited that he's the chairman because he's excited to get this city moving again.
So with ARPA money, the city of Springfield bought a couple of buildings here downtown. Mm-hmm. The reasoning was, well, if we buy the buildings, now we can market them, that we can actually get someone into these buildings. So far, that hasn't worked out. The guy who bought the Mardi Gras block has a building here in the South End, and it's my understanding, and I'll certainly be correct if I'm wrong, so far there's nothing been done with that building, and now in his inventory, he's got a whole city block, and in fact, a building with a parking lot with 132 spaces. So I think in most communities, these kinds of resources would be viewed very positively, that this would be a way. And I'm just wondering if either of you would be willing to advocate to try to get businesses, occupations into these buildings that's already here, and in fact the city is zoning 2 of them.
I mean, I think I would. I mean, one of the things that with that particular block of buildings is it's right across the street from MGM, right? And one of the things we dropped the ball as a city is that we didn't try to push those developments while, parallel with MGM. I think we all just sat there and waited. And I think, when I talked to some of the folks, their frustration about it was like, owners, landlords were sitting on it hoping that MGM was going to buy them out. But to me, that should have been just as much an essential part of the parallel with MGM getting done. So yeah, I think we need to look at that. I don't know what the condition of those buildings are, and not having a background in commercial real estate or anything like that, but I do know that updating those buildings is probably going to cost a chunk of change. And what are we doing as a city to support that now that we own those buildings and keeping them up? But I think we should be looking into that and and encouraging some of the small businesses to come downtown, because commercial real estate right now is in a really interesting space, I think, not just here in Springfield, but across the country, with a lot of more folks working from home, right? You've got the whole hybrid thing. So we've got to be a little bit more, creative in terms of how do we bring people down here. One of our biggest selling points is that we're a lot less expensive from a housing perspective when you compare us to other regions, but also that same thing I would imagine would be true for commercial. So how do we leverage that creatively to get folks in there?
Right, absolutely. Being a city councilor and being an at-large city councilor, it means that basically your district is the entire city, and that you would listen to residents from any neighborhood, you would advocate for residents in every neighborhood. Is there a part of the city that either of you feel more comfortable with, that you know better, that sort of might be your base in all of these efforts?
Being on the council for so long and coming back, I know most of the city like the back of my hand, all 8 wards. But the interesting thing too is, even though we went to ward representation, the ward councilors vote on city issues throughout the city too.
Right.
So they have a stake, they're stakeholders too in the entire city. So it's not as though you have 5 councilors that are at large. We're all basically really at large. Right. Because when they vote on issues, they're voting on issues like we are as at-large councilors. So no, there's no favorite area that I am concerned about. I look at all 8 wards, they're all important.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, I've been blessed to live in a number of the different neighborhoods. As a kid, I've lived in North End. Most of my youth was in the North End, but I also had stints living in Six Corners. I've lived in Indian Orchard as well, and then for a small time I've lived in Forest Park, right? So, for me, I've, like Brian, Councilor Santaniello, I've had the privilege of not just, outing in many areas of the city, but also in my time working at City Hall. I represented a bunch of different neighborhoods as well, including the Outer Belt Civic Association, East Forest Park. And so for me, I don't necessarily have a favorite. I do think that there are some neighborhoods that are experiencing some more challenges than others. Not to say that nobody's, dealing with challenges, but I think there are some that might need a little bit more attention. But no favorites in my book.
I was looking at some of the statistics that came out of the Public Health Institute of Western Massachusetts. They're about to come out with another report here for the city of Springfield. But we have certain zip codes in Springfield where the residents don't even live to be 70 years old. So I want to find out, why is that happening? There's got to be a reason. So they're going to come out with their new report for 2024, but in the previous reports, they had that as a statistic in there, and I want to find out why.
Now, I'm sure that you guys know this much better than me, but I was just reading about Governor Healy talking about financial shortfalls on the state level, and the possibility of making cuts that would be felt at the municipal level. Granted, you guys have a limited role in the budgetary process, but on the other hand, you certainly are going to hear from residents of the city if programs that have been benefiting them are cut or eliminated because of this. What do you think your roles as city councilors will be in order to try to address a shortfall that is imposed upon you by the state?
Well, we have to prioritize those cuts. One of the cuts I think is going to happen is in behavioral health. Behavioral health drug addiction, gun violence. Those are all behavioral health issues. Governor Healy's looking at a $637 million shortfall right now with revenue that isn't coming in. But we have to prioritize those cuts. Some areas I think we have to cut, but other areas we should leave at a level that benefits the city of Springfield, like behavioral health. That's very important.
What do you think, sir?
I agree with Councilor Santaniello. I think we've got to look at the budget, and I'm looking forward to getting a line by line item, look at it, and seeing how do we prioritize areas. I mean, I think the city of Springfield definitely has challenges that other municipalities don't necessarily have, and so I think we've got to, one, be good stewards of the money that we do have, and make sure that those dollars are getting put to best use and making the biggest impact, in where we need it. So whether that's behavioral health, mental health, I mean, public safety is always going to be a big issue, right? Our education system, I mean, that's a whole other bucket of money that's set aside. So I don't see anything going on there, but I think we've got some, hopefully, we don't have to make any more cuts. I'm knock on wood on that,
Right. Right.
But I think it's going to be pretty tough. But we have to prioritize.
Jose and I, Councilor Delgado, met after the primary, but before the election, and we talked about if we are elected, what can we do together? We've got to grow jobs in Springfield because that helps the tax base, that helps everybody. I mean, you can continue with a millionaire's tax, but eventually the millionaires are going to leave the state. They're doing that now. They're fleeing the state because they're getting taxed. So we have to grow jobs. That's where we get the revenue. Just not tax, tax, tax. We've got to grow, grow, grow.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that's one of the areas when you're talking about economic development is how do we bring in new dollars into the city, and I think that's going to be a big piece, so that one, it's not on the residents, right, in terms of our property taxes and things like that, because we heard it already, folks, you're like, my property taxes keep going up and I'm on limited income, right? So we've got to find other strategies and ways to work with the administration to make sure that we're bringing these creative new ideas, bringing these new businesses so that we can get new pockets of money. So it helps to offset, what the residents, are feeling from a pocket standpoint.
Well, I do know, just completely anecdotal, that a number of friends of mine were not real happy with their property tax bills. And unfortunately that came out soon enough with the, I'll just say the debacle about clearing off that big snowstorm we had. And a lot of people said, well, what the heck am I paying my taxes for when we can't clear the roads?
Correct.
We had two storms in a row now that we had problems with. Not just that first one, the last one was almost as bad. Yeah. So we've had two storms in a row. Yeah. One of these days we're going to have somebody where an ambulance can't get down a street because of the snow, or accidents are happening. We're just lucky that nothing major happened so far, but something will.
Yeah.
So again, knowing what the role of the city council is versus knowing what the role of the mayor is, what can you guys do to basically say, okay, what is our problem? Do we have not enough equipment? Do we have enough drivers? Is it not accurately budgeted? Although snow removal is one of the few things that Massachusetts allows municipalities to go into deficit for, because you can never predict what kind of winter we have.
Correct.
Right.
And we don't want to tie up a whole bunch of money in a budget that you don't use. But what would you guys recommend? Because this is something that really irritated people just recently.
Well, what I can say, Mike, to that is I, as the chair of the audit committee, I recently called for a meeting. I did a joint meeting with Councilor Malo Brown, who's the chair of the maintenance development, and it was just on that specifically, right? We heard a lot of residents and folks, pretty much giving the city a new one, especially you had the mayor come out and he apologized, which, how often do you hear that,
That has
right?
never happened before.
Right, how often do you
with
apologize?
Storm removal, no.
So we recently had that meeting, because I was concerned as well. I was like, what are we doing? This is not unique to this year. This is something that we've heard over several years. And we had Chris Signoli, the head of the DPW, come on. We were gracious that he came on, but he outlined a lot of things that need to get done, right? The biggest thing he mentioned to us is the capacity. He says, we need about 150 trucks on the road, plowers to do the streets properly. I think he said we had about 88, right? So you're talking about almost half
Right.
of the capacity that you need to do that. So he also mentioned, and one of the and a bunch of reasons he gave for that is, well, some folks just don't want to, plow in the city of Springfield for whatever reason. He also said he was having just capacity issues within his own department to have enough folks to drive the big trucks that we have. And he made a list, but my question to him was, yes, I know this. What are our sister cities doing, right? Because everybody can point to a Ludlow, or I drive through Ludlow and this and that, but it's like it's apples to oranges comparison in my opinion, because we're a much bigger city, right? We're the third largest city in Massachusetts. We have a lot more folks coming in and out of our city, and in comparison. But what I asked us is, I want to see a comparison, to our sister cities. What's Worcester going through? What's Hartford? And Chris mentioned that they're going through similar challenges. I actually yesterday ran into a Worcester city councilor. So the other cities are having challenges, but to me it's like, all right, we've heard this, but what are the next steps we're going to take to do this? How can we communicate to the residents to say, hey, we need more folks to be plow drivers? What are the requirements to be plow drivers? 'Cause I'd love to see that getting out to the community. I'm sure there's many folks here who probably have trucks. How do we train folks to get it for that, right? We can't just say we don't have enough and then that's it. How do we take action? I said, how can us as city councilors help you? How can the community help you to put that out and kind of recruit and do that? Because we can't just put our hands up and keep saying that, right? Because residents expect certain services to come.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I want to thank you very much for coming in today. And I'll ask you this as a closer. If people have got concerns or questions or just want to make a statement, what's the best way for residents of Springfield to reach either one of you?
Well, they can call my cell number. It's 413-537-4290. And I'm in the process now of having neighborhood meetings open to the public, and I'm going to have those throughout all 8 wards. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully I can use some of the libraries.
Okay, yeah. Jose, how about you?
Same with me. I mean, my cell phone number is 413-200-0526. You can also email me, jdelgado@springfieldcityhall.com. And just like Councilor Santaniello, I'm actually looking forward to getting out into the neighborhoods as well. I'm actually going to put together a schedule, because I'd like to at least once a month, whatever, a couple times a month, get out into the different neighborhoods, wards, go up to some coffee shops, because I want to hear what the residents, have to say. I heard a little bit during the campaign trail, but now as an actual elected official, as a city councilor, right, I want to make sure that I'm continuing to listen to what folks have to say.
Great. Well, thanks very much, guys, for coming on today.
Thank you.
And folks, you've got their cell phone numbers. If you have an issue, be sure to let somebody know about it. Talk to a city councilor. Just don't put it on social media. Talk to somebody who can actually, hopefully, help you. And thanks very much, everyone, for watching this edition of Government Matters.